After 23 desperate calls from my son begging me for the $20 million inheritance, I finally understood that my wife was right. He never saw me as his father, but as an obstacle between him and the money. If you do not want to miss the most shocking revelation of this story, subscribe right now because what I discovered about my own son will leave you speechless. My name is Robert. I'm 58 years old, and for 25 years I believed I had built the perfect family. But the day I opened my late wife Helen's will, my world collapsed in a way I never imagined possible. I am sitting here at the same desk where Helen used to review her investments, staring at the phone that will not stop ringing. Matthew, the son I raised as my own since he was 8 years old, has called 23 times in the last 2 hours. His voicemails have escalated from desperate pleas to barely veiled threats. Dad, please pick up. We need to talk about the will. You cannot do this to me. I am your son. But for you to understand why I decided not to answer those calls, and why I took the hardest decision of my life, I need to tell you how I got to this point. It all started 3 months ago when Helen was fighting cancer in her final days. I had dedicated every second to caring for her, sleeping in a chair next to her bed, feeding her when she could no longer do it herself, and holding her hand while the pain consumed her. Matthew, however, appeared barely twice at the hospital during those 3 endless months. The first time he arrived with a forced smile and a bouquet of cheap flowers, but his eyes could not hide his impatience. He stayed exactly 20 minutes, just enough time to ask how his mom doing and casually mention that he had been thinking about the family's future. Helen, still conscious, looked at him with a sadness that broke my heart. The second visit was even more devastating. Helen was already in critical condition, connected to machines, fighting for every breath. Matthew went straight to the point. Dad, we need to talk about the important papers. Mom told me once she had made a will. Where are the documents? In that moment, while I looked at my dying wife, something broke inside me. Helen opened her eyes with effort and whispered something that only I could hear. Robert, the drawer, the truth. During 25 years, Matthew had been the center of our lives. We had invested in his private education, paid for his whims, financed his failed projects, and covered his debts. When he married Sarah, we bought them a house. When he lost his job, we paid their expenses for 8 months. When my grandson was born, we were the ones who paid all the medical bills. But as Helen grew weaker, Matthew became more insistent with his visits of concern. They always ended with the same question. Have you thought about updating the will? With the changes in tax law, it would be prudent. Helen died on a rainy Tuesday in March. At the funeral, Matthew cried appropriately, received condolences with dignity, and gave an emotional speech about the woman who raised him. But I noticed something no one else saw. Throughout the ceremony, his eyes were constantly searching for Helen's lawyer, Dr. Henderson. 3 days after the funeral, when I was still processing my grief, Matthew appeared at the house with Sarah and a folder full of documents. Dad, I know it is soon, but we need to review the financial matters. Mom would have wanted us to handle everything quickly. It was then that I knew I had made the right decision by not telling him anything about what Helen had revealed to me in her final conscious moments. In that secret drawer of her desk, I found not just the real will, but also a letter that would change everything forever. The letter began like this. My dear Robert, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer with you. There is something about Matthew that I should have told you years ago, but I did not have the courage. Now, observing how he has acted during my illness, I know you had the right to know the truth. While the phone continues ringing with Matthew's 24th call, I open that letter one more time. Her words, written with the trembling hand of a dying woman, contain secrets that will destroy the image I have of the last 25 years of my life. But they also contain the key to understanding why Helen structured her will in such a specific way, so devastatingly precise. and why very soon, when Matthew sits in front of Dr. Henderson expecting to hear about his $20 million inheritance, he will discover a truth that will change his life forever. The phone has stopped ringing. Now I know that Matthew is on his way, and I am finally ready for the conversation we should have had 25 years ago. I never thought that falling in love with Helen Castle would turn me into the most naive man in the world. It was 1998. I was 33 years old and working as a civil engineer at a mid-sized construction firm. She had just been widowed and needed to remodel the family mansion she had inherited from her late husband, Michael Castle, a real estate tycoon whose fortune amounted to figures I could barely imagine. I remember our first meeting vividly. Helen was 35, elegant and cultured, but there was something vulnerable in her green eyes that attracted me irresistibly. Her son Matthew was running around the house, an 8-year-old boy with overflowing energy and a mischievous smile that immediately stole my heart. "Robert Wright," she said to me while we reviewed the structural blueprints. "Matthew needs a father figure. It has been very difficult for him since we lost Michael." Those words sealed my fate. Not only did I fall madly in love with Helen, but I also developed an instant paternal love for that little boy who followed me around the construction site, asking me thousands of questions about hammers, screws, and excavators. The first few months were magical. Helen invited me to dinner after work, and I stayed extra hours helping Matthew with his math homework. "You are incredible with him," Helen would tell me, stroking my cheek. Michael never had time for these things. He was always traveling closing deals. For Christmas that year, Matthew gave me a drawing where the three of us appeared as a family. I appeared with a yellow hard hat holding his hand. Helen was in the middle in a blue dress, and he had a huge smile. At the top, he had written in childish handwriting, "My new family." I cried that night when Helen could not see me. We got married in April of 1999. Matthew was our ring bearer, carrying the rings with ceremonial seriousness. During the honeymoon in Hawaii, he stayed with Grandma Linda, but he called us every night. "When are you coming back, Daddy Robert? I miss you guys so much." Upon returning, Helen proposed something that would change our lives forever. "I want you to legally adopt Matthew. He needs stability, a present father. Michael left him an inheritance that he cannot touch until he is 30, but you can give him something money cannot buy. Unconditional love." The adoption was finalized in September of 1999. I remember the exact moment when the judge declared, "Mr. Robert Miller, you are now legally and formally the father of Matthew Miller Castle." Matthew hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Now you are really my dad forever," he whispered in my ear. During the following years, I gave myself completely to being the father Matthew needed. I took him to soccer every Saturday, attended every school event, helped him with science projects, and taught him to drive when he turned 16. Helen watched with pride as our father-son relationship flourished. Financially, we decided that I would manage the active investments, while Helen supervised the portfolio inherited from Michael. "You are brilliant with numbers," she told me. "I trust you more than any financial advisor. Under my management, the family net worth grew from $8 million to more than $20 million in a decade. We spent summers at the beach house where Matthew learned to sail and fish. Dad, when I grow up, I want to work with you in construction," he would tell me while we waited for the fish to bite. "We can build buildings together and make more money for Mom." His words filled me with hope. I imagined a future where Matthew and I worked side by side, expanding the family business, taking care of Helen in her old age. I invested in his education as if he were my own blood. Private schools, piano lessons, tennis, swimming, all the best that money could buy. During his teenage years, Matthew went through the typical rebellion, but he always maintained respect toward me. "Thank you for not abandoning me like other stepfathers," he told me one night after an argument about his grades. "I know I am not your biological son, but you have loved me as if I were." Helen and I spoke frequently about our pride in having created a solid family. "We did something beautiful," she said as we watched Matthew graduate from prep school. with honors. Michael was never present, but you gave Matthew everything he needed. When Matthew turned 20, he began showing interest in the family business. Dad, I want to learn about investing. Teach me how you multiplied the family money. We spent hours in my office reviewing financial statements, analyzing market opportunities. I felt like the proudest father in the world. Helen watched our training sessions with satisfaction. You are preparing our son very well for the future, she would say. Michael never would have taken the time to teach him these things. But now, sitting here with that devastating letter in my hands, I wonder if everything I thought I built during those golden early years was simply a carefully crafted illusion. The memories I treasured as the purest moments of my life perhaps contained signs I was too blind to see. Helen's letter suggests that even in those early years, when Matthew seemed to genuinely love me, he already understood something about our family dynamic that took me decades to comprehend. And that understanding would change everything I thought I knew about the son I loved as my own. The years from 2000 to 2010 were the golden decade for our family. Matthew had entered college to study business administration, and I had decided to aggressively expand our businesses, taking advantage of the real estate boom. Helen supported me completely. You have an eye for opportunities that Michael never had. He was conservative. You are a visionary. My strategy was simple but risky. Reinvest every dollar of profit into new projects. I bought land in areas that were starting to develop. I built residential complexes for the emerging middle class, and I diversified into shopping centers. Helen contributed $3 million of initial capital from her inheritance as seed money, trusting fully in my business vision. This is for Matthew's future, she would tell him while we signed multi-million-dollar contracts. When we have grandchildren, we want to leave them an empire, not just money sitting in bank accounts. Matthew came to the construction sites during his college vacations. I remember vividly the day I taught him to read architectural blueprints at the Bella Vista Estates project. Dad, this is incredible. You are creating homes for hundreds of families, he told me with genuine admiration. His eyes shone when I explained profit margins and growth projections. By 2005, our net worth had reached $12 million. Helen was ecstatic. Robert, you have doubled what Michael took 20 years to build. Matthew will have more opportunities than we ever dreamed. That year, Matthew graduated summa cum laude and gave a speech that made me weep with pride. I dedicate this achievement to my parents, especially my dad Robert, who taught me that success is not inherited. It is built with hard work and strategic vision. I decided to celebrate by giving him something special, a brand new Audi A4 and a 3-month trip to Europe. Enjoy your youth, I told him, handing him the platinum credit card. When you return, you will start working with me for real. During his absence, Helen and I planned to officially incorporate him into the family business. We could give him 30% of the shares as a graduation gift, Helen suggested. After all, someday he will inherit everything. It is better that he learns to handle real responsibilities. When Matthew returned from Europe, he brought new ideas and contagious energy. Dad, I saw real estate developments in Barcelona and Milan that we could replicate here. The future is in eco-friendly projects and smart technology. His proposals were brilliant. Together we designed the Eco Living Deluxe project, a sustainable residential complex that became our greatest commercial success. Pre-sales exceeded all expectations, generating $8 million in net profits. We are the perfect team, Helen told me, while we reviewed the quarterly financial statements. You have the experience, Matthew has fresh ideas, and I bring financial stability. This family is destined for great things. By 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, our economic solidity allowed us not only to survive, but to thrive. While other developers went bankrupt, we bought their assets at liquidation prices. Matthew identified opportunities I never would have considered. Dad, this crisis is temporary, but real estate in premium locations is eternal. His analysis was prophetic. The buildings and land we acquired during the crisis appreciated 400% in the following 5 years. By 2013, our family net worth had reached $18 million, and Matthew was recognized in business circles as the young prodigy of the real estate sector. Helen organized elegant dinners where she boasted of our achievements to friends and business partners. My husband Robert transformed a modest inheritance into an empire, and our son Matthew is taking the company into the future, she announced proudly during toasts. Matthew married Sarah in a spectacular wedding that cost $400,000. I paid for every detail with joy. The reception at the city's most exclusive club, the designer dress, the honeymoon in the Maldives. I only have one son, I told Helen when she questioned the expense. His happiness is priceless. As a wedding gift, we bought them a $1.2 million mansion in the exclusive Hidden Hills gated community. Matthew cried when I handed him the keys. Dad, I do not deserve this much. You have been the most generous father in the world. When James, our first grandson, was born, I established a $500,000 trust fund for his college education. Matthew hugged me in the hospital. Dad, I want James to have the same wonderful grandfather that I had as a father. You are my hero. By 2015, we had diversified into commercial real estate restaurant franchises and a stock investment portfolio generating monthly dividends of $80,000. Matthew managed the commercial development area, while I supervised residential construction. We should document all of this for future generations, Helen suggested during a family celebration. The story of how Robert built an empire from nothing and how Matthew is expanding it toward international horizons. We reached 2020 with a net worth of $20.5 million, multiple income-generating properties, and a business employing more than 200 people. Matthew had developed his own line of luxury residential projects, all financed with family capital. But now reading Helen's letter, I understand that during all those years of building and growth, there were signals I ignored completely. Moments where Matthew asked too much about wills and successions, conversations where he calculated future inheritances with disturbing mathematical precision. The fortune we built together, which I believed was the perfect legacy for our beloved son, was perhaps simply the bait Matthew needed to keep me hooked in a dynamic I was too blind to recognize. The first crack in my perfect family image appeared during my 50th birthday celebration in 2015. Helen had organized a surprise party in our garden, inviting business partners, relatives, and close friends. Everything seemed perfect until it was time for the speeches. Matthew stood up with a glass of champagne, looking impeccable in his Italian suit. I want to thank the man who has given us everything we have. He began with an emotional voice. The audience kept an expectant silence. My stepfather, Robert, has been generous beyond any reasonable measure. The word stepfather hit me like a punch. In 16 years of marriage, Matthew had never used that term publicly. It was always my dad or my father. Helen noticed my expression and squeezed my hand under the table, but Matthew continued without flinching. Thanks to his financial generosity, I have been able to build my own career without the limitations other young entrepreneurs face. It is comforting to know there will always be someone willing to cover my expenses when my projects do not generate enough revenue. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah seemed mortified, whispering something in his ear, but Matthew ignored her completely. His speech sounded more like a financial report than words of filial affection. That night, I confronted Helen in private. Did you notice something strange in Matthew's words? Helen sighed deeply. He has been under a lot of work stress lately. His new real estate project is not generating the expected sales. He probably feels pressured. I wanted to believe her explanation, but something had changed in the family dynamic. Matthew began visiting us less frequently, And when he did, the conversations inevitably revolved around economic topics: investment returns, property valuations, tax strategies to optimize future inheritance. In December of that same year, Matthew requested a loan of $800,000 to expand his line of executive apartments. "It is a unique opportunity, Dad. The land is undervalued, but I need to act quickly before other developers notice." I transferred the money without question, trusting his business judgment. 6 months later, I casually discovered that he had used $300,000 to buy a Porsche Cayenne and finance a family vacation in Aspen. When I asked him about it, he was visibly annoyed. "Dad, I need to maintain a certain professional image to close important deals. Besides, my family deserves to enjoy the fruits of our hard work." His tone was defensive, almost aggressive. "Do you doubt my ability to manage money?" Helen intervened as a mediator. "Robert Matthew is a responsible adult. If he invested in personal image, he must have valid strategic reasons." But I noticed she avoided my gaze while defending her son. The following months brought a series of investment requests that followed the same pattern. Matthew presented apparently lucrative opportunities. I financed the projects and then discovered unjustified personal expenses mixed with legitimate business costs. During Christmas dinner in 2016, Matthew announced that Sarah was pregnant with their second child. The family joy was tarnished when he immediately began calculating additional child-rearing costs and suggested we should review the family trusts to include the new baby. "Can we not just celebrate the news without talking about money?" I asked with growing frustration. Matthew looked at me as if I had said something absurd. "Dad, financial planning is a family responsibility. Michael never thought about these things. That is why Mom had to deal with legal problems after his death." It was the first time he mentioned Michael in a comparative way, and the message was clear. I had to be more financially farsighted, or Helen would face the same difficulties in the future. In 2017, Matthew began openly questioning my investment decisions during monthly family meetings. "Dad, your methods worked in the past, but the market has evolved. You should consider transferring more operational control to the young generation." His criticisms were technically valid, but his attitude had changed radically. He was no longer the grateful son who valued my experience. Now he was an impatient junior partner who considered my methods obsolete. Helen noticed the rising tension. "They are going through a natural adjustment phase," she explained to me. "Matthew is establishing his independent professional identity. It is normal for him to question paternal authority in business." But the signals multiplied. Matthew began arriving late to family gatherings. He answered text messages during dinners and canceled plans with last-minute excuses. When he was physically present, his attention seemed to be elsewhere. The most revealing incident occurred during Helen's birthday in April of 2018. Matthew arrived 2 hours late to the celebration without a gift, and with a vague explanation about work emergencies. During dinner, he received multiple calls, which he took without apologizing. "Matthew, we are celebrating your mother," I said finally. "Could you turn off the phone for 1 hour?" His response left me frozen. "Dad, some of us have real responsibilities that cannot wait. Not all of us have the luxury of retiring at 50. The silence at the table was deafening. Sarah apologized quickly for his behavior, but Helen had visibly paled. Matthew continued eating as if he had said nothing offensive. That night Helen cried for the first time in years. "I do not know what is happening to our son," she told me between sobs. "He is no longer the same loving and respectful Matthew we raised." I did not recognize him either, but I still clung to the hope that it was a temporary phase. Maybe business stress, family responsibilities, or social pressure were affecting his behavior. I wanted to believe that the Matthew I had loved for 20 years was still there, simply hidden under layers of ambition and frustration. But now, with Helen's letter in my hands, I understand that those were not signs of temporary stress. They were the first indications that the mask, carefully built over decades, was finally beginning to crack, revealing a truth I was too naive to recognize. In March of 2022, our life changed forever when Helen received the diagnosis no family wants to hear: advanced stage pancreatic cancer. The oncologist, Dr. Reynolds, explained the harsh reality to us with professional compassion. Mrs. Castle, considering the aggressiveness of the tumor and its location, we are talking about a prognosis of 6 to 12 months. Helen received the news with a serenity that surprised me. She took my trembling hand and whispered, "Robert, we have had 24 wonderful years together. Now I need you to be strong for what is coming." Her green eyes, although frightened, maintained that determination I always admired in her. I immediately reorganized my entire life to become her primary caregiver. I hired specialized nurses for night shifts. I transformed our master bedroom into a complete medical suite and established a rotation system to accompany her during chemotherapy sessions. Matthew received the news by phone as he was in Miami closing a real estate deal. His initial reaction was genuine shock. How is it possible Mom has always been so healthy? When the symptoms began, he promised to return immediately to be with us. However, immediately turned into 5 days. When he finally appeared, he came straight from the airport with carry-on luggage, suggesting his stay would be brief. "I have to go back on Friday for a crucial presentation with Japanese investors," he explained, while superficially hugging Helen. "But I wanted to be here for the first oncology consultation." During that consultation with Dr. Reynolds, Matthew asked questions that seemed strangely clinical to me. What is the estimated cost of the full treatment? Does medical insurance cover experimental chemotherapy? What happens with medications not approved by the FDA? Helen reassured him. "Son, do not worry about medical expenses. We have sufficient resources for any necessary treatment." But I noticed Matthew taking detailed notes on his iPhone as if he were calculating something. The first months of treatment were brutal for Helen. Chemotherapy left her exhausted for days. She completely lost her hair, and her body weight dropped alarmingly. I slept in a recliner next to her bed, monitoring her vital signs every few hours. Matthew established a visitation pattern that baffled me. He appeared every 2 weeks, usually on Sunday afternoons. He stayed exactly 90 minutes and always had work emergencies forcing him to leave abruptly. His conversations with Helen followed a predictable script. Questions about her physical well-being, updates on James and Isabella, his daughter, and vague references to pending financial matters. During one of these visits in July, Helen was particularly weak after a radiation session. Matthew sat next to her bed and began. "Mom, Sarah and I have been thinking that maybe you should consider updating your will considering, well, the current circumstances." Helen opened her eyes slowly. "Why would I have to update my will, son? Everything is perfectly organized." Matthew shifted uncomfortably. "It is just that tax laws have changed, and we want to ensure Robert has no legal complications later. You know when the time comes." The coldness of his vocabulary disturbed me deeply. Talking about when the time comes in front of Helen seemed to me not only insensitive, but cruel. But Helen responded with maternal patience. "Matthew, my lawyer, Dr. Henderson, reviewed all the documents last year. Everything is in order," Matthew insisted. "But, Mom, you should consider structuring things in a way that minimizes inheritance taxes. We could establish an irrevocable trust that—" Helen interrupted him with a firmness she had not shown in months. "Matthew, I do not want to discuss inheritances while I am fighting for my life. Those topics can wait." After Matthew left that afternoon, Helen confided something to me that chilled my blood. "Robert, have you noticed that Matthew never asks about my pain, my fears, or how I feel emotionally? He only talks about money and legal documents." I wanted to defend our son, but I could not deny the obvious. In 5 months of terminal illness, Matthew had never asked about side effects of medications, never stayed during a chemotherapy session, never brought flowers or any personal detail that could brighten his dying mother's day. In contrast, I meticulously documented every symptom, every change in her condition, every moment of temporary improvement. I learned to make nutritious smoothies she could tolerate, to massage her feet swollen by steroids, to read her romance novels during nights of insomnia caused by medication. In October, when Helen began requiring supplemental oxygen, Matthew suggested optimizing the home environment by transferring some non essential assets to easier access accounts. It is for practicality, he explained, if we need quick liquidity for experimental treatments or specialized care. Helen looked at him with an expression I could not fully decipher. Matthew, we have enough liquidity for any medical emergency. Why are you so worried about reorganizing investments now? He avoided her gaze. I just want to be prepared for any eventuality. Mom, during November, Helen had several episodes of extraordinary lucidity between periods of sedation for pain. In one of those moments, she asked me to bring her laptop. I need to review some important documents, she said, with a weak but determined voice. She spent 3 hours reviewing digital files, making phone calls to Dr. Henderson, and writing something in a document she kept private. When she finished, she sealed a manila envelope and asked me to keep it in the safe in our bedroom. Robert, this envelope contains information you must know, but only after I'm gone. Promise me you will open it when that time comes. I promised her, although I did not understand why she needed so much secrecy. Helen seemed relieved after completing that mysterious task. Now I can rest, knowing I made the right decisions to protect those who truly love me. That night, while Helen slept deeply thanks to the morphine, I received a text message from Matthew. Dad, how are Mom's finances? Sarah is worried because the treatments must be costing a fortune. Do you need economic help? It was the first time in 8 months that Matthew offered economic help, and something about the timing seemed suspicious to me. Helen had never mentioned financial difficulties, and our net worth was more than enough to cover any conceivable medical expense. I replied, Everything is under control, son. Your mother has excellent medical coverage and abundant resources. His reply arrived immediately. Perfect. Just wanted to make sure everything is well organized. Now, reading the letter Helen wrote during those last months of lucidity, I understand she had observed much more than I believed possible in her weakened state. Her insights into Matthew's behavior during her illness contained revelations that would completely change my understanding of the last 25 years of our family life. December of 2022 arrived with the medical certainty that Helen had weeks, not months. Dr. Reynolds had prepared me for this stage. Mr. Miller, your wife, is entering the terminal phase. It is time to consider palliative care and family goodbyes. Helen spent most of the time unconscious due to potent painkillers. But during her lucid periods, her mind remained surprisingly clear. It was during these moments she would make the most devastating revelations of my life. One early morning on December the 15th, Helen woke up fully alert around 3 a.m. Robert, come closer, she whispered with an urgency she had not shown in weeks. I need to tell you something crucial before it is too late. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking her fragile hand between mine. Her green eyes, although sunken by illness, shone with a familiar intensity. During these months of sickness, I have observed things about Matthew that have opened my eyes to a reality I preferred to ignore for years. What kind of things, I asked, although part of me feared the answer. Helen breathed deeply before continuing. Have you noticed Matthew has never come here without his calculator or his phone with financial apps? Every time he sees me connected to these medical machines, his eyes calculate how much my daily maintenance must cost. Her words hit me like stabs, but I knew she was right. During the last visits, I had observed Matthew looking furtively at the medical monitors, not with filial concern, but with an expression I now recognized as economic impatience. 3 weeks ago, when you went out to talk to the doctors, Matthew approached my bed, believing I was completely sedated. Helen continued with a trembling voice. He began searching the drawers of my nightstand looking for documents. When he found nothing, he muttered, "Damn it, where does this woman keep her important papers?" The horror I felt was indescribable. "Helen, are you sure of what you heard?" "Completely sure. But is there something worse, Robert?" That same afternoon, I heard a phone conversation Matthew had in the hallway. He thought I could not hear him from here, but the walls are thinner than he thinks. Helen paused to regain strength, and I waited with my heart racing. He was talking to Sarah, explaining that the situation is dragging on longer than expected, and they needed to accelerate certain legal processes. When Sarah asked him if I was suffering, Matthew replied, "What matters is that this ends soon. The medical expenses are affecting the estate we will eventually inherit." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. How was it possible that the son I had raised with so much love was capable of such cruelty? Helen squeezed my hand with the little strength she had left. "And Robert, there is something else you must know about Matthew. Something I have kept secret for 25 years because I hoped I was wrong. What is it, love? When Matthew was 12, shortly after you legally adopted him, I found a diary he wrote for a school assignment. One of the entries said, 'My new dad, Robert, is very generous with money. Mom says someday I will inherit everything he is building. It is good to pretend I love him a lot, because that makes him spend more on me.' The room began to spin around me. A 12-year-old boy wrote that? Yes, Robert. I confronted Matthew about that entry, and he cried, asked for forgiveness, said it had been a silly joke. I wanted to believe him. I destroyed the diary and never told you because I thought it was just the confusion of a child adapting to a new family dynamic." Helen paused again, clearly exhausted by the effort of this confession. "But during these months of illness observing his behavior, I have understood that diary entry was not childish confusion. It was the first written evidence of what Matthew really thought about our family. Why didn't you tell me this before I asked, feeling a mixture of devastation and betrayal? Because I loved you too much to destroy your paternal happiness. You looked at Matthew with so much pride, with so much genuine love. How could I snatch that joy from you based on a child's words? I hoped that over time your fatherly love would transform him into the son you deserved." Helen began to cry weakly. "But now, seeing how he behaves while I am dying, I know I was wrong. Matthew never changed. He simply became more sophisticated at hiding his true motivations." Over the next few days, Helen revealed a series of observations accumulated over decades, episodes I had interpreted as filial affection, but which she had recognized as calculated manipulation. "Do you remember when Matthew turned 16 and told you he wanted a small party, just for the family, because he valued your company more than expensive celebrations?" she asked me one afternoon. Of course, I felt very proud to have raised a son so centered on family values. That same week, I heard Matthew telling his friend Patrick on the phone I told my stepfather I wanted an intimate family party, and the idiot believed it was out of filial love. The truth is, a big party would have cost $15,000, but pretending I am a loving son cost me zero and guarantees he keeps financing my whims. Each revelation was like receiving an emotional stab. Helen continued destroying my most precious memories with the truth she had observed from her more objective maternal perspective. And when Matthew graduated from college and dedicated his diploma to the best father in the world, Robert. That same night, I heard him talking to Sarah about how he had acted perfectly emotional during the ceremony to guarantee you would buy him the Audi he wanted. The systematic destruction of my paternal memories continued for hours. Helen had been a silent witness to 25 years of psychological manipulation, protecting me from the truth, because she knew my vulnerable fatherly heart. "Robert, there is one last thing you must know," Helen told me during what would turn out to be our longest and final conversation. "In my desk bottom right drawer there is a small key. That key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown branch. The box number is 1247. What is in that safety deposit box? Documents. I have been collecting for years evidence of Matthew's true intentions, recordings of conversations, copies of text messages he left on forgotten phones, photographs of documents he reviewed in secret. You will also find my reel, will not the copy Dr. Henderson has. Helen looked at me with an intensity that chilled my blood. Robert, I have protected our assets in the way Matthew least expects. When the time comes to read my will, you will discover I took very specific decisions based on 25 years of silent observation. 3 days later, on December the 22nd, 2022, Helen died peacefully while I held her hand. Her last words were, "Robert, now you know the truth. Do not allow Matthew to destroy the legacy we built together. Be strong." Matthew arrived at the hospital 2 hours after Helen passed away, and his first question was not about how her death had been, but, "Dad, where are the will documents?" "Bob, we need to schedule an appointment with Dr. Henderson as soon as possible." 2 days after Helen's funeral, while Matthew and Sarah organized family meetings to discuss the next steps, I went discreetly to First National Bank with the key Helen had entrusted to me. My heart was beating rapidly while the employee escorted me toward safety deposit box 1247. Inside that metal box, I found a thick folder labeled with Helen's familiar handwriting for Robert, the full truth. Upon opening it, my hands shook, seeing dozens of meticulously organized documents, audio recordings on small digital devices, and photographs documenting behaviors I had never witnessed. The first document was a letter dated just 3 weeks before her death. "My dear Robert, if you are reading this, it means you finally had the courage to open this box. For 25 years, I have systematically documented Matthew's true character, not because I wanted to destroy your paternal happiness, but because I knew someday you would need this evidence to protect yourself from his manipulation." I continued reading with growing horror. I began this documentation when Matthew was 15, and I heard him telling his friend Charles Robert, "is so naive I could convince him the moon is made of cheese if I use the right words. It is like having an emotional ATM that never runs out of funds." The folder contained transcripts of conversations Helen had recorded secretly during family gatherings. One of them, dated in 2018, included a conversation between Matthew and Sarah in our garden. "Matthew, my stepmother, is aging, and Robert is completely blind from fatherly love. When Helen dies, he will be so emotionally devastated that I will be able to convince him to transfer total control of the family companies to me. Sarah, are you sure he suspects nothing? Matthew Robert is incapable of seeing evil in me. I've cultivated this image of the perfect son for decades. He would die before questioning my filial loyalty." My hands shook as I turned the pages. Helen had documented phone calls Matthew thought were private conversations he had had with financial advisors without my knowledge, and even photographs of legal documents he had researched about inheritances and wills. But the most devastating part was in the second section of the folder. Copies of text messages between Matthew and various lawyers specializing in inheritance disputes. The messages dated from 2022 years before Helen got sick. "I need consultation on how to contest a will if the beneficiaries do not seem appropriate to me. My stepfather has total control over my mother's estate, but technically he has no blood right to the original inheritance of my biological father." Another message sent to a private detective said I require a discreet investigation into possible financial irregularities in the management Robert Miller has done of Helen Castle's estate. I seek evidence of embezzlement or improper administration. The third section contained Helen's true will, dated just a month before her death. Reading it, I understood the legal brilliance of my late wife. I, Helen Castle Miller, in full possession of my mental faculties, declare that the will in the possession of Dr. Henderson is an outdated preliminary document. My official will is contained in this document. The testamentary provisions were surprising. I bequeath to my husband, Robert Miller, the entirety of my personal estate, including all properties, investments, and financial assets accumulated during our marriage. This decision is based on 24 years of observing his unconditional dedication to our family and his brilliant administration of our shared resources. But the section about Matthew left me breathless. To Matthew Castle, recognizing that during 25 years he received education housing vehicles, properties, and business opportunities valued at approximately $3.2 million, I bequeath the symbolic amount of 1,000 US dollars. This provision reflects my complete knowledge of his true intentions toward our family. The will continued with a clause that chilled my blood. In case Matthew Castle attempts to contest this will, he will automatically lose the right to any legacy, and the $1,000 assigned will be donated to the Children's Hope Charity Foundation. Furthermore, all loans and financing he received from our family estate document in Annex C will become immediately callable debts. Annex C was a meticulous record of every dollar Matthew had received since 1999. Private education vehicles, properties, business loans, personal expenses, family vacations. The total amounted to $3,247,892. But the most shocking part was in the final clause of the will. I instruct my husband Robert to reveal to Matthew Castle the information contained in the sealed envelope marked True Origin, only during the official reading of the will. This revelation explains the fundamental reasons for my testamentary decisions. With trembling hands, I looked for the sealed envelope. Upon opening it, I found documents that would change everything I thought I knew about Matthew. The first document was a paternity report dated in 1997, a year before Helen and I met. The result was categorical. Michael Castle is excluded as the biological father of Matthew Castle with 99.97% certainty. The second document was even more shocking. A second paternity test performed secretly by Helen in 2010, confirming that Robert Miller was also not Matthew's biological father. The third document contained the most devastating truth. Matthew was the son of Daniel Vega, Michael's business partner, who had scammed $2 million from the family company before fleeing the country in 1996. Helen had maintained an extramarital affair with Daniel during the last years of her marriage to Michael. A handwritten note from Helen explained Robert Matthew carries in his blood the same manipulative and scamming tendency as Daniel. For 25 years I hoped I was wrong, but his behavior has shown that genetics is stronger than upbringing. Daniel also feigned affection while planning to rob us. Matthew learned these tactics instinctively. Helen's final note broke my heart. Robert, you were the only man who genuinely loved Matthew without knowing his true origin. You gave him a chance to be better than his genetic heritage predetermined. If he failed to become the son you deserved, it was not for lack of fatherly love, but because he chose to follow the path of his true father, manipulation, and betrayal. I closed the folder, feeling completely destroyed. For 25 years, I had unconditionally loved the son of a scammer, believing I was building a family legacy based on solid values. Helen had protected this secret for decades, hoping against all hope that love could transform Matthew's fundamental nature. Now I understood why Helen had structured her will so specifically. It was not cruelty, it was the wise decision of a woman who had observed Matthew's true nature for a quarter of a century. Upon leaving the bank, I held 3 sealed envelopes addressed to Dr. Henderson containing specific instructions for the reading of the will. Helen had orchestrated every detail of this revelation, knowing it would be the only way to liberate me from 25 years of emotional manipulation. That night, Matthew called me insistently. Dad, I scheduled the appointment with Dr. Henderson for tomorrow. I'm excited to see how Mom took care of both of us in her will. His confident tone gave me nausea. He had no idea of the devastation awaiting him. After discovering the content of the safety deposit box, I needed to process all the information before facing Matthew. Helen had left me a detailed map of 25 years of deceptions, but I needed to personally verify some of the most devastating claims contained in her documents. The first stop was Dr. Henderson's office, where Helen had deposited specific instructions before dying. The lawyer, a 65-year-old man with 4 decades of experience in inheritance law, received me with a somber expression. Mr. Miller, I must admit that in my entire professional career, I have never handled a case so emotionally complex. He began while organizing various documents on his desk. Your wife Helen visited me 3 times during her last months of life, each time with more disturbing revelations about the family dynamic. Dr. Henderson showed me audio recordings Helen had left as legal testimony. I want it officially recorded that for 25 years I observed systematic manipulative behaviors by Matthew Castle. I have documented evidence of his true intentions toward the family estate, as well as his complete lack of genuine affection toward Robert. But the most disturbing thing was a conversation Helen had secretly recorded just 2 months before her death. Matthew had visited Dr. Henderson's office without my knowledge, trying to obtain information about the will. In the recording, Matthew's voice could be clearly heard. Doctor, I understand there is attorney-client confidentiality, but I am Helen's only son. I have the right to know at least the general terms of her will, especially considering my stepfather might be unduly influencing her due to her medical condition. Dr. Henderson's response had been professional, but firm. Mr. Castle, as long as your mother is mentally competent, only she can authorize the disclosure of testamentary information, Matthew had insisted. Doctor, I am not questioning my mother's mental faculties, but pain medications can affect judgment. I just want to ensure the testamentary provisions reflect her true wishes, not the emotional manipulation of someone who would benefit from her death. Listening to that recording gave me physical nausea. Matthew had tried to sow doubts about my moral integrity, while Helen fought cancer, suggesting I was manipulating her for personal gain. My next investigation took me to the office of private investigator Arthur Stone, who had worked discreetly for Helen during the last 5 years. Stone was an ex-cop specialized in family investigations and financial fraud. Mrs. Castle hired me initially to verify certain suspicions about her son's business activities, Stone explained while reviewing a thick file. What we discovered was much more serious than she anticipated. Stone showed me photographs of Matthew in secret meetings with business competitors of our family company. During 2021, your son met at least 6 times with Lopez Brothers Construction, our main rivals in the real estate sector. In these meetings, Matthew provided privileged information about our pending bids and pricing strategies. The photographs were irrefutable. Matthew handing over confidential documents, receiving envelopes of money, shaking hands with executives who had been trying to sabotage our projects for years. But that is not the worst, Stone continued. We also documented that Matthew established secret bank accounts in the Cayman Islands under the name Consulting Solutions Laubatide. Through this shell company, he received $280,000 in payments from Lopez Brothers Construction over 18 months. Stone handed me copies of international wire transfers showing the systematic payments. Matthew had been selling family trade secrets while pretending loyalty and dedication to our companies. Did Helen know about this? I asked with a trembling voice. Mrs. Castle received these reports monthly. Each revelation devastated her more, but she insisted on continuing the investigation. I need to know the full magnitude of the betrayal before taking definitive decisions, she would tell me. Stone's investigation had also discovered personally hurtful activities. Matthew had been publicly criticizing my business ability in professional circles attributing our successes to luck and favorable market conditions, while suggesting he was the true brain behind the successful operations. In a meeting at the Elite Business Club, your son stated verbatim, "Robert is a good man but lacks modern strategic vision. When I inevitably take control of the family companies, I will implement revolutionary changes that will multiply our profitability." Read Stone from his notes. But the most painful revelation was yet to come. Stone had documented conversations between Matthew and legal consultants specialized in will contests. Your son consulted with 3 different firms regarding strategies to void inheritances based on undue influence by the surviving spouse. Stone explained. Specifically, he was exploring legal arguments to prove you had manipulated Helen to draft a will that favored you unfairly. The transcripts of these legal consultations were chilling. Matthew: My stepfather has completely controlled my mother's finances for 24 years. Now that she is dying, I am sure he is pressuring her to modify her will in his favor. I need legal options to protect the inheritance that rightfully belongs to me. Lawyer: Do you have evidence of coercion or manipulation, Matthew? Not yet, but I can build a convincing case. Robert is the sole beneficiary of my mother's death, which establishes clear motive for undue influence. Stone had also investigated Matthew's personal finances, discovering a worrisome pattern of irresponsible spending and hidden debts. Despite the millions he had received from our family over decades, Matthew had gambling debts of $420,000 with underground casinos. Your son has been gambling compulsively for at least 3 years, reported Stone. The debts have accumulated because he uses family money for bets expecting to recover the losses with big wins. It is a destructive cycle typical of gambling addicts. The photographs showed Matthew at high-stakes poker tables, illegal casinos, and meetings with dangerous loan sharks. He had been financing this secret addiction with funds I believed were destined for legitimate business investments. Stone's final investigation revealed something that completely destroyed me. Matthew had been looking for potential buyers for family properties, anticipating his future inheritance. He contacted 3 luxury real estate agencies requesting hypothetical valuations for the family mansion, the beach house, and the main commercial buildings, Stone explained. He told them he was planning future estate reorganizations and needed to know current market values. A secret recording captured Matthew telling a real estate agent, "I want to have buyers ready for when I have legal control of these properties. My stepfather has emotional sentiment toward these places, but I understand real estate must generate liquidity, not nostalgia." Upon leaving Stone's office, I sat in my car for an hour processing the magnitude of the betrayal. For 25 years, I had financially and emotionally fed a snake that was patiently waiting for the moment to strike. Helen had silently observed this evolution for decades, documenting every betrayal while protecting my paternal heart from the devastating truth. Her love toward me had been so deep that she preferred to carry the knowledge of Matthew's real nature alone. That night, when Matthew called me with his usual feigned filial concern, I heard something completely different in his voice. It was no longer my adopted son expressing affection. It was Daniel Vega executing the same type of emotional scam he had used to steal millions from the Castle family decades ago. Genetics had prevailed over paternal love, and Helen had structured her will to protect me from the consequences of my own blind generosity. The week prior to the official reading of the will became a systematic bombardment of desperate communications from Matthew. After having processed all the evidence collected by Helen and Detective Stone, I decided to distance myself strategically. Observing how his true personality would unravel under pressure. The first day after the funeral, Matthew visited me with a masterful performance of filial grief. He arrived with Sarah and the kids, James, 8 years old, and Isabella, 5, clearly using them as emotional shields to soften my heart. "Dad, I know we are going through the hardest moment of our lives. He began with an artificially broken voice, but Mom would have wanted us to stay united as a family. She always said you and I were her greatest pride. Sarah complimented the performance perfectly. Robert Matthew has been very worried about you. You have not answered his calls, and we know processing Helen's death must be devastating. We are here to support you in everything you need. During that visit, I observed behaviors I previously would have interpreted as affection, but which I now recognize as calculated manipulation. Matthew moved through the house discreetly, inspecting valuable objects, opening drawers, looking for tissues to dry his tears, and taking photographs to remember Mom that clearly documented artwork and antiques. When I mentioned that Helen had left specific instructions to handle her affairs, Matthew showed his first crack of desperation. What kind of instructions, Dad, as her biological son, I have legal rights over certain aspects of her inheritance. I hope you understand, this isn't personal, it is simply legal protocol. That night, after they left, Matthew began his intensive phone campaign. The first calls maintained a respectful and concerned tone. Call 1-8:30 p.m. Dad just wanted to make sure you're okay. You did not eat anything during our visit. Do you want Sarah to make you some food? Call 9:45 p.m. Dad, I have been thinking about the comments you made regarding Mom's instructions. Could we meet tomorrow to review together what she left? As a family, we should face this united. Call 10:30 p.m. Dad, I know you do not want to talk tonight, but I am worried about your emotional well-being. Maybe we should consider hiring a psychologist specialized in grief to help you process the loss. When I did not answer any of those calls, the tone began to change gradually. Call 11:15 p.m. Dad, I need us to talk about practical matters. Mom had bank accounts, investments, and properties that require immediate attention. We cannot allow financial aspects to get complicated by emotional grief. On the second day, the calls became more frequent and urgent. Call 7 p.m., Dad. I've been worried all night. Have been. Why aren't you answering? Is everything okay with your health? I'm going to stop by the house to verify you are safe. Call 7:30 p.m. Dad, I am at the house gate. Your car is there, but you are not answering the doorbell. If you do not open in 10 minutes, I am going to call medical emergencies. I decided to answer that call to avoid an unnecessary spectacle. Matthew, I am fine. I just need time to process everything. The reading of the will is scheduled for Friday. Can we talk then? His response revealed barely contained frustration. Dad, 5 days is a long time to wait. There are urgent matters requiring immediate decisions. The family companies need continued direction. Bank accounts could freeze and... Matthew, I interrupted firmly. Everything is under control. Helen left very specific instructions, and we are going to respect them completely. What kind of specific instructions? He asked, with an urgency he could no longer disguise. Dad, as Helen's son, I have the right to know the details of her final provisions. Everything will be clarified on Friday during the official reading with Dr. Henderson. After hanging up, Matthew dramatically intensified his efforts. The next 48 hours brought an avalanche of increasingly desperate communications. Text message. Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. Dad, Sarah is very worried about your behavior. The kids ask why Grandpa does not want to see them. Do not punish the innocent for your personal pain. Call 12, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Dad, I spoke with Dr. Henderson, and he told me the will contains unusual provisions. What does that mean? Helen took decisions I was not fully informed about. WhatsApp message. Wednesday, 11:45 p.m. Dad, I cannot sleep thinking something is wrong. Helen always treated me like her biological son. If there is any problem with the will, we can solve it as a family without involving courts. On Thursday, Matthew deployed his most manipulative strategy involving third parties to pressure me emotionally. Call from Grandma Linda, Thursday, 9 a.m. Robert Matthew told me you have not wanted to talk to him since the funeral. That boy is destroyed by Helen's death, and now he feels he is also losing his adopted father. Do you not think you should console each other in this difficult moment? Call from Godfather Luis, Thursday, 2 p.m. Robert Matthew asked me to talk to you because he is very worried. He says you are acting strangely and fears for your mental stability. As a lifelong friend, I advise you not to take important decisions while you are processing grief. Call from business partner, Garcia, Thursday, 4:30 p.m. Robert Matthew contacted me about some urgent company matters. He says you need to sign certain documents to keep operations running normally. Is everything okay? Each call revealed how Matthew was orchestrating a campaign of social pressure, painting me as an unstable widower who was making irrational decisions due to emotional trauma. The last calls on Thursday night showed Matthew completely unmasked. Call 20 Thursday, 10 p.m. Dad, this is ridiculous. Helen is dead, but life goes on. We have financial responsibilities, employees depending on us, and business decisions that cannot wait indefinitely. Call 21, Thursday, 10:45 p.m. Dad, if there is something in Helen's will that worries you, we can discuss it as rational adults. But keeping me in the dark is only creating unnecessary anxiety for the whole family. Call 22, Thursday, 11:30 p.m. Dad, I need you to understand something. I am Helen's only biological son. Regardless of what her will says, I have legal rights that no document can completely annul. Call 23, Friday, 12:15 a.m. Dad, if you do not answer this call, I'm going to assume something grave is happening, and I am going to take legal measures to protect family interests. Do not force me to turn this into a public matter. That last call revealed his true intentions completely. He was no longer feigning filial concern. Now he was threatening legal actions if he did not get immediate access to information about the inheritance. While I listened to his threatening voicemail, I remembered Helen's words. Robert, when Matthew feels cornered, his true personality will emerge completely. In that moment, you will see the true son of Daniel Vega. The 23 calls had been a masterclass in psychological manipulation, starting with fake filial concern, escalating to emotional pressure through third parties, and culminating with direct legal threats. On Friday morning, the day of the will reading, Matthew would finally understand that his manipulation campaign had been completely useless. Helen had anticipated every single one of his tactics and had structured her will to definitively neutralize 25 years of calculated deceptions. Friday arrived with a mental clarity I had not experienced in weeks. After processing all the evidence collected by Helen, the revelations of Detective Stone, and observing Matthew's progressive transformation during his 23 desperate calls, I finally understood that my late wife had prepared me for this moment for months. At 8 a.m., I received the last communication from Matthew, before the reading of the will, a text message that eliminated any vestige of the filial facade he had maintained for 25 years. Robert, I hope you have reflected during these days on the consequences of keeping me excluded from Helen's affairs. As her only biological descendant, I have irrefutable rights that no will can invalidate. If there are irregularities in the testamentary provisions, I will correct them through appropriate courts. See you at 10 a.m. The legal coldness of his message contrasted dramatically with the emotional pleas of previous days. Now he spoke as Daniel Vega would have spoken, calculating, threatening, completely devoid of genuine affection. Before heading to Dr. Henderson's office, I reviewed one last time the documents Helen had meticulously prepared. Among them I found an additional letter dated just a week before her death. My dear Robert, if you are reading this on the day of the will, reading it means Matthew has shown exactly the behavior I predicted. During these days of silence, you will have observed how his mask of a loving son disintegrated progressively until revealing the true nature he inherited from Daniel. The letter continued, I structured this day not only to protect our assets, but to liberate you definitively from 25 years of emotional manipulation. When Matthew hears the provisions of my will and discovers the truth about his origin, you will finally see the man he always was, not the son you believed you raised. Upon arriving at the legal office, I found Matthew and Sarah waiting in the reception area. Matthew was wearing his best business suit and carrying a thick folder that presumably contained legal documents to dispute any provision not to his liking. "Good morning, Dad," he greeted me with a tense smile that did not reach his eyes. I am very sorry for the tension of these last few days. Grief affects us in different ways, but I am sure after today we can rebuild our family relationship. Sarah complimented with her usual rehearsed diplomacy. "Robert Matthew has been very anxious to resolve these matters, so you can focus on healing together. The kids constantly ask when they can visit Grandpa normally." Her words sounded hollow after everything I had discovered. Matthew was not anxious to heal. He was anxious to secure his inheritance. The kids were simply emotional tools in his manipulative arsenal. Dr. Henderson received us in his main office, where he had arranged the testamentary documents on his mahogany desk. His professional expression did not completely hide the anticipation of what he was about to reveal. "Gentlemen, before proceeding with the official reading of the will of Mrs. Helen Castle Miller, I must clarify that this document contains unusual provisions, reflecting very specific decisions of the deceased." Matthew leaned forward, his eyes shining with barely contained expectation. "Doctor, I understand Mom might have made emotional decisions during her illness. If there are provisions requiring clarification or modification, I am prepared to discuss them constructively." Dr. Henderson ignored his comment and began the formal reading. "I, Helen Castle Miller, in full possession of my mental faculties, and after deep reflection declare that this document completely replaces any previous will." During the first formal paragraphs, Matthew remained relaxed, occasionally nodding as if approving his mother's decisions. But his expression began to change when Dr. Henderson reached the specific provisions regarding the main estate. "I bequeath to my husband, Robert Miller, the entirety of my real estate properties, including the main residence, the beach house, and all commercial buildings. Likewise, I transfer to him the entirety of my financial investments, bank accounts, and business shares." Matthew interrupted abruptly. "Excuse me, the entirety, doctor. There must be a transcription error. Helen always assured me I would inherit the substantial part of the family estate." "There is no error, Mr. Castle." "Let us continue," replied Dr. Henderson unflinchingly. "These provisions are based on 24 years of observing Robert's unconditional dedication toward our family, as well as his brilliant and honest administration of our shared resources." Matthew's face had visibly paled. Sarah took his hand, but he pushed her away brusquely, completely focused on the lawyer's words. Regarding Matthew Castle, recognizing the financial benefits he received during 25 years, including education properties, vehicles, and business opportunities valued at $3.2 million, I assign him the sum of $1,000. "This is a joke," exploded Matthew, standing up violently. $1,000. "After being her son for 33 years, Doctor, this will is clearly the product of manipulation and coercion." Dr. Henderson raised his hand to silence him. "Mr. Castle, there are additional provisions you must hear before making legal declarations." Matthew sat down reluctantly, his hands shaking with barely contained fury. In case Matthew Castle attempts to contest this will, he will automatically lose the right to any legacy, and the $1,000 assigned will be donated to charity. Furthermore, all loans and financing he received from the family estate documented in the attached annex will become immediately callable debts, totaling $3,247,892. "This is legal extortion," screamed Matthew, completely out of control. Helen was not in a mental condition to make these decisions. The medications affected her judgment, Robert manipulated her during her illness. But Dr. Henderson continued imperturbable. Finally, I instruct that the information contained in the sealed envelope explaining the fundamental reasons for these testamentary provisions be revealed to Matthew Castle. With ceremonial movements, Dr. Henderson opened the envelope that would contain the most devastating truth of all. Matthew stared, his accelerated breathing betraying the panic beginning to invade his mind. Mr. Castle, your mother left specific instructions to reveal information regarding your biological origin that has remained hidden for 33 years. The silence in the office became dense and oppressive. Sarah looked alternately at Matthew and me, perceiving that something monumentally important was about to be revealed. Matthew had stopped screaming. His face showed a mixture of terror and confusion while waiting for the words that would change his complete understanding of his own identity. Dr. Henderson looked at me, awaiting my final authorization to proceed with the revelation. I nodded silently, knowing Helen had orchestrated this moment to liberate me definitively from decades of emotional deceit. It was the moment of absolute truth, and Matthew was about to discover that everything he believed he knew about himself, about our family, and about his financial future had been a carefully built illusion that was about to collapse completely. Helen's final decision was executing perfectly, and I finally understood that this day was not about inheritances or money. It was about justice, truth, and my personal liberation from 25 years of being the victim of the most sophisticated manipulation I had experienced. Dr. Henderson pulled the final documents from the sealed envelope, his grave expression reflecting the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Matthew had gone completely motionless, like an animal sensing mortal danger but unable to identify its source. Mr. Castle, began the lawyer with a solemn voice, your mother Helen instructed me to reveal information regarding your biological paternity that has remained hidden since your birth. Sarah instinctively squeezed Matthew's arm, who seemed to have stopped breathing completely. His eyes were fixed on the documents Dr. Henderson organized meticulously on the desk. According to paternity tests performed in 1997 and confirmed independently. In 2010, Michael Castle was not your biological father, declared the lawyer with clinical precision. Additionally, Robert Miller is also not your genetic parent. Matthew's face transitioned from initial shock to deep confusion. What does this mean? If Michael wasn't my father and Robert isn't either, then who? Dr. Henderson extracted an additional document from the envelope. Your biological father is Daniel Vega, the former business partner of Michael Castle, who embezzled $2 million from the family companies before fleeing the country in 1996. The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew stared at the documents as if he could change their content through sheer willpower. Sarah had paled completely, understanding the devastating implications of this revelation. Your mother maintained an extramarital relationship with Daniel Vega during the final years of her marriage to Michael, continued Dr. Henderson. When Daniel was discovered embezzling the company and fled hastily, Helen was pregnant, but hid the true paternity to protect her social reputation. Matthew finally found his voice, although it came out as a hoarse whisper. This is impossible. Helen would have told me the truth. We were very close. She loved me. Your mother loved you for 33 years, replied Dr. Henderson, but she also systematically documented behaviors that painfully reminded her of Daniel Vega, particularly the tendency to emotionally manipulate people who loved him to obtain financial benefits. It was then that I took out the folder I had prepared that morning containing some of the most damning evidence collected by Helen and Detective Stone. Matthew, there is something else you need to know. I showed him the photographs of his secret meetings with Lopez brothers, construction, the records of the bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, and the transcripts of his conversations publicly criticizing me while planning to seize business control. For 5 years, your mother meticulously documented your true personality. The business betrayals, the emotional manipulations, even your gambling debts that you financed with family money destined for legitimate investments. Matthew reviewed the documents with growing horror, his mask of a loving son dissolving completely while confronting irrefutable evidence of his systematic deceptions. Your mother also recorded conversations where you planned to contest her will, where you described me as an emotional ATM, and where you calculated the value of family properties, anticipating your future inheritance. Sarah stood up abruptly, looking at Matthew with an expression of horror and betrayal. Is all this true? Have you been planning to scam Robert for years? The late-night work meetings were to conspire against the family that has given us everything. Matthew ignored her, completely focused, obsessively on the documents destroying his identity, built over decades. This cannot be happening. I am Helen's son. I have lived in this family for 33 years. I have rights. You have no rights, I replied with a calm that surprised me. For 25 years, Helen and I financed you a life of luxury based on a lie. We gave you paternal love, business opportunities, properties, elite education, all while you planned to betray us at the opportune moment. Doctor, Henderson intervened with additional information Helen had prepared for this moment. Mr. Castle, your mother, also investigated the current whereabouts of Daniel Vega. Currently, he resides in Honduras, under a false identity, after being deported from 3 countries for frauds, similar to the one he committed against the Castle family. This final information completely broke Matthew's composure. He stood up violently, knocking over his chair. You are destroying me deliberately. For 33 years, I was part of this family. You cannot erase 3 decades of my life with papers and accusations. We are not erasing anything, I told him firmly. We are revealing the truth. Helen observed for 25 years, while you perfected your emotional manipulation techniques. Matthew began walking frantically around the office, his hands shaking while trying to process the magnitude of his situation. This is posthumous revenge. Helen took revenge on me because I couldn't be with her more during her illness. I had business responsibilities. I couldn't drop everything to be a nurse. It wasn't revenge, I replied with genuine sadness. It was protection. Your mother protected me from knowing your true nature for decades, because she knew how much I loved you. But she also protected our estate from being squandered by someone who had inherited the same scamming tendencies as Daniel Vega. Sarah approached Matthew with tears in her eyes. Matthew, how could you deceive me so well? Our married life, our children, has everything been part of some plan to get money from Robert and Helen. Matthew looked at her with a coldness he had never shown publicly. Sarah, you aren't that naive. You knew perfectly well that my love for Robert had tangible benefits. Do you think we live in a $1.2 million mansion because I am a business genius? That spontaneous confession finally revealed his true personality without filters. For 25 years, he had maintained a facade of a loving son. But under extreme pressure, the calculating and manipulative nature he had genetically inherited emerged. Sarah recoiled as if he had hit her physically. My God, what kind of monster are you? Even our marriage was a lie. Our marriage was a strategic alliance that helped me maintain the image of a responsible family man that Robert needed to see, replied Matthew with a brutal honesty that froze the blood. Dr. Henderson watched this family disintegration with a professional expression, but clearly impacted by the rawness of the revelations emerging spontaneously. Mr. Castle intervened. The lawyer, there are final provisions in the will I must read. If Matthew reacts to these revelations with violence, threats, or attempts at additional manipulation, it confirms completely the reasons for my testamentary decisions. If he shows genuine repentance and accepts responsibility for his actions, it demonstrates there is still hope for his moral redemption. Matthew looked at him with total contempt. Repentance? Why should I repent for being smart? Robert was an easy target, Helen a sentimental woman, and you two built a fortune that I helped multiply. I deserve that inheritance more than anyone. His final words eliminated any doubt about his true nature. There was no repentance, there was no acknowledgement of harm caused. There was no vestige of the son I thought I had raised with paternal love. In that moment, I fully understood Helen's wisdom. She had structured this day not only to protect our assets, but to liberate me definitively from 25 years of emotional manipulation. Seeing Matthew without his masks, I could finally let go of the imaginary son I had loved and confront the reality of the scammer he truly was. The transformation was complete. Matthew Castle had disappeared forever, and in his place was Daniel Vega Jr., with all the predatory instincts of his true father. 6 months have passed since that devastating confrontation in Dr. Henderson's office, and I can state with absolute certainty that they were the first 6 months of genuine freedom I have experienced in 25 years. The transformation was not immediate or easy, but every day that passes confirms Helen's extraordinary wisdom in orchestrating my liberation in such a precise way. The first week after the will reading was chaotic. Matthew tried to execute exactly the legal threats Helen had predicted, hiring a firm specialized in inheritance disputes to contest the will. However, his lawyers abandoned the case after reviewing the exhaustive evidence Helen had collected over decades. Attorney Morales, who initially represented Matthew, contacted me personally. Mr. Miller, in a 30-year legal career, I'd never seen such meticulous documentation of systematic family manipulation. Your wife not only protected your assets, she created an impenetrable case that no court would question. Sarah divorced Matthew immediately after the revelation, requesting full custody of James and Isabella. During the legal process, she confessed to having observed manipulative behaviors for years, but had rationalized everything as normal business ambition. Robert Weimer always knew Matthew calculated every family interaction in financial terms, but I thought it was simply his way of demonstrating responsibility. She explained to me during a painful conversation. I never imagined his love toward you and Helen was completely artificial. The children, James and Isabella, were carefully protected from the most traumatic details, but Sarah decided to maintain contact with me. You have been the only real grandfather they knew, she told me. Matthew may have been a fraud, but the love you gave them was always genuine. Establishing new relationships with my grandchildren under these complex circumstances required family therapy, but Dr. Patricia Ruiz, our psychologist, confirmed something that reassured me deeply. The children had instinctively perceived the difference between my unconditional love and Matthew's calculated interactions. James told me his dad always asked questions about money after visiting you, but that you only asked about his feelings and experiences, revealed Dr. Ruiz. Children recognize emotional authenticity better than adults. The reorganization of my family companies turned out to be surprisingly liberating. Without Matthew secretly sabotaging our bids or leaking information to competitors, profitability increased 35% in 6 months. Garcia, my business partner, observed, "It is as if we removed a virus that was corrupting the whole system from the inside. I implemented new policies of transparency and hiring, based on merit, not family connections. Employees who had worked faithfully for decades flourished under the environment of honest operations, confirming Matthew had created tensions I incorrectly attributed to normal business pressures. My emotional healing process included individual therapy with Dr. Carmen Vasquez, a specialist in family trauma and psychological manipulation. Robert, you were the victim of an extraordinarily sophisticated emotional scam that lasted 25 years, she explained. Your capacity to love unconditionally became your vulnerability, but it is also your greatest strength. Through therapy, I understood that my paternal love toward Matthew had been real and valuable, even if he never genuinely reciprocated. The love you gave transformed the lives of James and Isabella, inspired the business loyalty of your employees, and allowed Helen to experience emotional security for 24 years, Dr. Vasquez reminded me. 6 months after the confrontation, Matthew contacted me for the last time. His text message was completely different from the man I'd unmasked in the legal office. Robert, I have reflected deeply on recent events. I recognize my actions were inappropriate, and that I deeply hurt people who loved me sincerely. If there is any possibility of family reconciliation, I am willing to seek professional help and make economic restitution for damages caused. His message sounded calculated, like another manipulative strategy designed to regain access to the family fortune. I consulted with Dr. Vasquez, who analyzed the text. This message contains the classic elements of emotional manipulation: vague acceptance of responsibility, promises of change without specificity, and the implicit suggestion that you have a moral obligation to forgive. I decided not to reply. Helen had liberated me from the compulsion to eternally rescue someone who did not wish to be truly rescued. My new life was built on different foundations. I established the Helen Castle Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of family manipulation and financial abuse. I also financed research on hereditary patterns of antisocial behavior, hoping other adoptive parents could avoid my traumatic experience. I met Mercedes Aguirre, a 52-year-old widow whose husband had died of cancer 2 years earlier. Our friendship developed naturally through a support group for people who had lost spouses to terminal illnesses. Mercedes had faced her own experience with family manipulation when her brothers-in-law tried to appropriate properties that rightfully belonged to her. Robert, I recognize in you the same confusion I felt when I discovered people I believed I truly loved only wanted to exploit me, she confided during one of our long conversations. But I also see the strength that develops after surviving that betrayal. Our relationship progressed slowly, based on mutual respect and shared experiences. Mercedes never tried to replace Helen in my heart. Instead, we built something completely new, based on radical honesty and authentic communication. 1 year after Helen's death, I visited her grave with new perspectives on our marriage. "Thank you for protecting me for so long," I told her marble headstone, "and thank you for loving me enough to set me free when the right time came." I left fresh flowers and a letter where I told her about my new life, my healthy relationships with James and Isabella, the growth of the family companies, and my growing friendship with Mercedes. Helen, I finally understand that true love includes liberation when necessary. Your last gift was teaching me the difference between being loved and being used. Today, while I write this story at the same desk where Helen meticulously organized my liberation, I can state with certainty that the $20 million were successfully protected. But more importantly, my personal dignity, my capacity to form authentic relationships, and my understanding of my own value were rescued from decades of psychological erosion. Matthew, or more precisely the son of Daniel Vega, finally chose to follow his biological father's steps. According to reports I receive occasionally, he moved to Colombia, where he attempts to establish business schemes, sounding suspiciously similar to the scams Daniel had perpetrated decades ago. My story is not about revenge or resentment. It is about personal redemption and the liberation that comes when you finally accept painful truths you have avoided for years. Helen taught me that loving genuinely sometimes requires establishing boundaries that protect both the lover and the beloved from destructive dynamics. The $20 million continued generating dividends I used to honor Helen's memory, supporting victims of family manipulation, and building a legacy based on emotional authenticity. But the most valuable treasure Helen left me was not money. It was the truth that allowed me to recover my own life after 25 years of living it for someone who never sincerely reciprocated. Now, at 59 years old, I finally know what it means to be loved for who I really am, not for what I can provide financially, and that knowledge that peace is worth infinitely more than any monetary inheritance.